Good afternoon. Good afternoon from South Africa. My name is Zeni Thambadu. I am the Deputy Director of the National Association of Childcare Workers. I'm also the Vice Chairperson of the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. The South African National Association of Childcare Workers, in partnership with the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, welcomes you to this first global webcast live here in South Africa at the 20th Biannual Child and Youth Care Conference. We are at this conference celebrating 40 years of service to children in South Africa. We have here with us in our auditorium celebrating with us more than 1,200 child and youth care workers at this conference. But more excitingly today, we are joined by more than 120 global delegates who are live watching this webcast with us today. Just a little bit about the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. They work towards a vision where a world will be serviced by well-planned, well-trained, and well-supported social service workforce, effectively delivering promising practices that improve the lives of vulnerable populations. Our mission is to promote the knowledge and evidence, the resources and the tools, and the political will and action needed to address key social service workforce challenges, with a special focus on low to middle income countries. So the approach of the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance is to serve as a convener, to advance knowledge, and to advocate for the workforce that is supported by policy reforms globally and nationally. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce you to our panelists for today. Professor Jim Anglin from the School of Child and Youth Care at the University of Victoria in Canada will present on a definitional framework for child and youth care work. Dr. Tom Garfat will talk around the characteristics of child and youth care work. I will present on the para-social service worker competencies that have been developed by the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance. Mr. Jack Phelan will talk about supervision of child and youth care workers. Reverend Robert Sibua from Zambia, from the Zambian Association of Child and Youth Care Workers, will talk about the development work of the Zambian Association of Child and Youth Care Workers. And Ms. Aziwe Magida, who is the chairperson of the Professional Board for Child and Youth Care Workers in South Africa, will talk about the statutory regulation of South African child and youth care workers. It is my pleasure now to hand over to Professor Jim Anglin.
Thank you, Zeni. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. And even though we can't see all of you around the world, it's wonderful knowing you're there. We hope that the technology continues to work well. This definitional framework was based on some work I did with a colleague, Roy Ferguson, 30 years ago. And it has evolved somewhat since then, but most of the main elements have been there since the beginning. And I want to make it clear that while other professions and professionals may share some of the characteristics that I'll be talking about, or the elements of the profession that I'll be talking about, I think what makes child and youth care unique is the cluster of elements that come together on a regular basis to form this unique profession. So, first of all, there are 6 elements that I would like to refer to. And the first one is that child and youth care is primarily focused on the growth and development of children and youth. What is in the child's best interests? And of course, one would expect a child and youth care profession to be focused on the child. So while families and communities are of great interest to us, we are most interested in understanding families and communities as context for the development and care of children. Other professions may come in focused on the family as a unit. We come in to make sure the family and the community is functioning in a healthy way for the child. Secondly, we're concerned with the totality of the life of the children and youth with whom we work. Janusz Korczak was a Polish pediatrician who actually became a child and youth care worker for 30 years when he ran an orphanage in Warsaw. And he talked about giving up medicine in order to work with the soul of the child, which I think is another and rather poetic way of saying the totality, the whole child. So the focus of this profession is on a certain section of the life cycle, and that helps to define the scope of our practice as well. The third element that I would like to talk to is we have a focus on social competence. And if one goes back 70 years to the early pioneers in this field, they have always had a belief in the competence of the child. No matter what problems they were experiencing, no matter how desperate their situation, there was always a faith in the child. So certain phrases have been used. The contemporary phrase is a strengths-based approach. That wasn't the term used 70 years ago, but it's the same notion. Or the courage to trust in the child, as one eloquent writer put it, rather than on a pathology or problem-based orientation. And I think those of you in the audience can understand the difference that makes to how we approach the child. So unlike many other professions, child and youth care practitioners do not operate in a single setting. We do day-to-day direct work, or our work is founded in day-to-day direct work with children. So in the early days, almost all the child and youth care workers were doing direct work with young people. Over time, they moved into management positions. We started to get education and training programs, and so workers began to move into other roles, such as research, policy development. So now, child and youth care work encompasses the full range of services and functions that have to deal with children. However, I think what distinguishes us is that we are still grounded in the realities of the child in their day-to-day life space. So the notion of life space is a defining characteristic of child and youth work. So other professions work on an interview or an assessment-based basis, or in a single setting, such as a school or a hospital. But child and youth care workers are found virtually anywhere a child may be found. And their life space includes their internal world as well as the external world of their relations with adults and others. The fifth element is we're concerned with developmental and therapeutic relationships. If there's one word that one finds in the child and youth care literature over and over and over again, it's relationship. Our way of working with children is to develop a human-to-human relationship. And that challenges us to be our whole selves in relation to the whole self of the child. That provides quite demanding pressures on us in order to set the appropriate boundaries. How does one have a full relationship and yet have some boundaries as a professional? That's a continuing discussion, and particularly in training programs with new students, how to walk that line. And so the developmental and therapeutic relationships, we don't do therapy in the sense that a psychiatrist or psychologist does a 50-minute therapy session. However, everything we do should be therapeutic. And I think Tom may say a little more about that. And the sixth element is one that I added more recently, just in the last year or two. It was so apparent to me, working with young students coming up through the profession, that one is actually committing to a lifelong moral and spiritual journey. And I think at this conference, over and over again, people refer to the spiritual or moral dimension of our work. We have a faith, and we have a faith in children. And children are born with far more than we ever put into them. And how do we help that relationship to that person develop in a very moral and spiritual manner? I think it's partly because we are impelled by the pain and suffering of the people we work with. And there's something, I think, about pain and working with pain. I'm looking at Don Matera here, who's written so eloquently about this. There's something about engaging people in pain that necessitates a spiritual or moral orientation. It's not a technical operation that we're involved in. And I think it's really important from the start. So I felt I needed to add that into the definition so that from the very beginning, students were aware that they are getting into a whole person, whole life commitment. An important part of child and youth care, what I call the child and youth care difference, is the fact that we are often the person most present in the life space of the children with whom we work. Often they have been removed from their families for various reasons, orphaned or abused or neglected. Disease has affected the family, so the child is in some way removed from their context. And so the child and youth care worker is often the person most present in their life space. And I think that gives us an incredible opportunity as well as responsibility to be purposive, to be intentional about what we do and how we do it. So child and youth care workers learn that every moment is a moment that we must be present, and they're developmental and therapeutic. And finally, I think at the same time, we have to work and advocate within the broader social service system. I think in the early years of our profession, we focused very much on the child, and we worked in the moment with the child. However, I think over the years, we've realized that we also have to be active in the political and social environment to advocate for the best interests of children beyond just the care relationship, because that happens within a context, within an environment. And if that environment isn't healthy, then it's going to be very difficult for a healthy child to return to their environment. So I think the NACCW has worked very hard across the country to affect policy, to bring about societal awareness, to create a national or societal context that is healthy for children, not just a relationship with an individual worker or with a family or a community. So those are the major components that I would suggest define the child and youth care difference as a profession.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom, and it's my opportunity and privilege this afternoon to share with you all a little bit about what I think are defining characteristics of our field, the field of child and youth care work. We like to say sometimes that these characteristics of the field define how we are with young people. And so they talk about how we are, who we are, while we do what we do. And it's a way of saying that when we watch effective child and youth care workers, there are certain things that we might see in their approach and in their way of being with young people. These characteristics of a child and youth care approach, they identify our way of working with children, young people, and with families. They define how we do what we do. They involve this whole process of being with young people, interpreting or analyzing and understanding what's going on, and then actually doing or interacting with or intervening with young people. And ultimately, these characteristics of a child and youth care approach define more than just what we do. They define a way that we have as people of being in the world with others. The characteristics of a child and youth care approach don't just impact your work. They are rather a part of your life and who you are. And so they've been organized together within this particular framework. And here we see what we might identify as 25 different characteristics of a child and youth care approach. And everyone here at this conference has a copy of this in their conference bag, so you don't have to worry about remembering them. But they've been divided into three particular sections: being, doing, and interpreting. And so the question then becomes, how do these characteristics of our field show up inside the process or our way of working with young people? And so we've organized these together around the idea of the meaningful use of daily life events and a process of intervention that we simply call BID, to remind us of being, interpreting, and doing. And more these days, you find that we don't talk in child and youth care about relationship-based practice. Rather, more and more you see the term relational child and youth care work. And that represents a fairly significant shift in our field over the last 10 or 20 years, because we always talked about relationship-based work. And when we did, we talked about the characteristics of the people in the relationship. And more we've become concerned with the characteristics of the relationship itself, this between us, if you want, where this between us in the space that we create when you and I engage in relationship. And while historically we would say things like in relationship-based practice, we wonder about whether or not the children like us, or do I have a good relationship, or we might say she's the child care worker and she's the child. Now more and more we talk about this relationship. Is it a safe place, this between us that we've created? Is it safe for you? Is it safe for me? Is it a healing space, this space that we create between us? So in our focus, in a relational approach, we're constantly asking questions about the quality and the characteristics of the relationship itself. And Carol Stewart from Canada once said, the relationship is the intervention. That we believe as child and youth care workers that relationship is central to healing, to growth, and to development. We work with young people and others to try and create what I call moments of relational safety. In this moment, with this person, in this relationship, am I safe? Am I safe from harm from others, from harm from myself? Is this a place where I feel safe enough to take the risks necessary to take the steps I need to take in order to do something different? And so we focus on these moments, and our intention is to make these moments meaningful in whatever way we can. So child and youth care practice involves the purposeful use of everyday life events. In this moment of encounter in relational safety with this young person, how can I connect this moment with this child to their growth and the goals that we've agreed on and established together? And so we're engaged in helping young people to create safety, and for us to create safety for them in their relationships with significant adults in their fields, through being with other, being with self, being in relationship, being with other. And then in that context, we interpret, we wonder, what does this mean to the young person? How are they understanding this moment or this experience? And how are we understanding this moment and this experience? And what defines this moment and this experience, i.e., the context? And then finally, we intervene, or we do with the young person in a manner that respects the young person. We intervene with intent and with purpose and with engagement that comes out of perhaps one of the most important of the characteristics that you saw, and that is the characteristic of love. That always in our relationship with others, there is a question of deep caring. So ultimately, child and youth care practice is not just about what we do, but it is a way of being in the world with others. It is not just a set of techniques, but rather it is a set of skills and knowledge and strategy that help us understand how to be with others in a healing way, and it permeates all aspects of our work. It is about how we are, who we are, while we do what we do. And therefore, you can be a child and youth care practitioner, or a child and youth care teacher, or child and youth care research, or seeing as how Jim mentioned, Dawn, you can be a child and youth care poet. How we are, who we are, while we do what we do.
Thank you. At the Global Alliance, the interest group on paraprofessionals in the social service workforce identified that this particular group was a priority area in our initial Alliance Planning Committee. It was initially convened in 2013, and we have 35 participants from 10 different countries in this interest group. Now, what we were looking at is setting out a set of guiding principles for para-professional social service workers, guiding principles that help all of us, be it funders and organizations that are developing programs for para-social service workers, to be sure that we are guided in an appropriate way in the way we design and deliver training to para-social service workers. Now, we developed the generic core functions to strengthen service programs and training programs. And at the same time, we focused on developing para or auxiliary child and youth care competencies. This slide maybe just helps understand that we do understand when you're developing workers bottoms up. You might need to find generic core areas of function that is relevant to all of them. However, it is possible as well to develop social service practitioners bottoms up at a para level that start to link to a clear profession or a clear social service profession area. So you could have, after your generic competencies, you could have, and we do have, the auxiliary child and youth care worker. You could have your auxiliary or para community development worker and your para or auxiliary social worker. And we looked at this model for developing the workforce, the social. Some of the key issues that motivated the need for a competency framework is the fact that to date there is no agreed upon and recognized definition for a para-professional social service worker, either at global or regional level. And this is especially true in the African context, where there are a range of different kinds of paraprofessionals that have rapidly been trained and developed to fill some of the existing gaps in the professional social service sector. Now, these paraprofessionals take on a range of different titles and roles within the larger social service system. And so we have people called by a range of different names and are doing different things. So the guiding principles that have been developed represent a base for the development of programs and activities for the training, for the development, the deployment, and support of paraprofessional social service workers. They recognize country-specific contexts because they promote the planning, the development, and the support of the para-social service worker. Now, let me give you an example of the auxiliary child and youth care worker, because this is the focus on the child and youth care competencies that have been developed. We developed these competencies, first of all, at two levels, recognizing that in developing the child and youth care worker, we might want to develop the child and youth care worker with less than 1 year of training and move them into a training that might be 2 years or more than a year. So competencies have been developed for the development of child and youth care workers with less than 1 year training and with more than 1 year training at para-professional level. We identified the child and youth care functional areas, but we also looked at what would the training competencies be. How do we guide the training so they start linking into the child and youth care profession? They link at developing these workers to the child and youth care competencies. And then we looked at the practice competencies. If they were trained in a particular way, what would we want to see in practice? What would we want to see that are the elements of child and youth care practice that we can see at para level? And this is an example of one of the examples of a large number of competencies for the para child and youth care workers that have been developed. What we did with these competencies was have a validation process. We went in April 2015 to Kenya, where they were validated with FITSE Kenya Child and Youth Care Conference in Kisumu. And what was interesting in talking through these competencies with the workers in Kenya is someone said something very interesting, that we have had lots and lots of training. And if you ask people to bring you out their certificates, they will bring you out a box. But at the end of it all, you are nothing. You have no identity. You can't be forceful or powerful. We need to direct training to a profession and give a good career development plan for people working in care. I think this is a very telling quotation, because what it says is that parasocial service workers globally, and particularly in Africa, require to be developed from the bottom up in a particular career path. They need not to be receiving just ad hoc training that doesn't lead to the development of some identity, some profession that they would want to be committed to. So the focus today here on child and youth care is to bring to the global audience the need for us to understand that in the social service sector, there are various professionals that need to be developed. We are a dominantly social work environment in the social service sector, and people understand social work very well. But I think the child and youth care sector, for example, is not as well recognized and understood. And we wanted to take this opportunity to present from our conference here in South Africa, our 20th biannual conference, an opportunity to showcase child and youth care work. I thought we should take a moment now to just take some questions for the first two presenters in particular. And I wonder if around the globe, from the 120 different people out there in different countries, if there are any particular questions, particularly to Professor Jim Anglin and Dr. Tom Garfat, that have come through. There haven't been any questions yet, so we hope to hear at the end of our presentation. We will now actually go on to the next presentation, with Jack Phelan on supervision in child and youth care work will take over.
Good afternoon. It's nice to be here. I want to start with the fact that I actually teach in a university. I'm a faculty member where you need a 4-year bachelor's degree to be qualified, if you want, as a professional child and youth care worker. My belief, too, is that when we talk about a fully formed, highly skilled professional child and youth care worker, you're talking about someone with about 5 years of experience. That experience has been under good supervision, and you've had an educational journey that includes pretty much a full academic degree. So that's the end point, right? So when we talk about this fully formed, totally professional child and youth care worker, you're talking about someone who spent probably 6, 7, 8 years, very focused, very well trained, and able to perform child and youth care work, which is all the description you've had earlier by my two colleagues. And they're able to do it well in the life space. So just to start with, that's our end point. Now we have a starting point that talks about Isibindi projects. And Isibindi projects are focused on trying to get the local community to develop and emerge a child and youth care profession that's based on people who are from that community, who then will gradually go through the process of becoming a child and youth care professional. So you really are starting by looking for and trying to identify good people who have the potential to become that child and youth care professional, but presently and immediately as you start have little or no experience or training or even picture of what child and youth care is. So we're looking at really two ends of a fairly long scale, all right? The focus I'm having today is on supervising child and youth care workers at the paraprofessional level, right? So we're not talking about supervising highly educated, highly skilled child and youth care workers. We're talking about starting with people and trying to get them to start on that journey. And it is a long journey. So when you begin as a new child and youth care worker, the first thing that you have to deal with is you're working in the life space. You're not working in a classroom. You're not working in an office. You're actually going to work in other people's lives, which is really a place that you can't control. So it is immediately experienced by that new person as being a very unsafe place. You don't really feel like comfortable because there are so many different things that can happen and you have to be almost ready for anything, right? One of the second issues for that new worker is you're dealing with daily events, feeding people, playing with people, helping them function sometimes in things like how to wash yourself, how to do a budget, all those daily events. And one of the first things that a new worker encounters is the framework they have is how I do things. That's what I have to offer you. The problem is they also have to meet the agency standards. The agency, the Isibindi Project people say, here's what we want you to create. So now I've got to not only include how I do it, I've got to include how you want me to do it. The third thing is you're working with someone in their life space, and they do things their own way. Possibly, in fact, probably much differently than either the way you do it or the way the agency wants you to do it. So you have those daily events with that three-level kind of tension all the time around your work, especially when you're brand new. You're very aware of that. And then the next thing is you're not just sitting behind a glass wall giving out instructions. You're actually interacting all the time with people. The nice thing about office work is you don't have to touch anybody, you know, and this is a very different kind of work. So you're interacting socially. You literally have to laugh with them sometimes or cry with them sometimes. It's a very personal kind of work. I always say to new workers, if you have a big nose, but you've never told anyone you thought your nose was too big, it's your own secret, when you're working with kids, within 30 seconds, someone's going to call you big nose. So it's very personal. It's also very cultural. You're going to be working with people who see their own selves in a cultural context that might to you seem very illogical or not as good as the way you think they should do it. They also have political differences and physical differences that really have to all be respected at the same time that you're trying to, especially as a brand new worker, hold on to who you are. So now we're talking about two levels of paraprofessional. The person with less than a year's experience, and it's interesting because the Social Alliance people put this together. It really is exactly the way even highly trained workers go through the process of becoming a professional. We graduate people with a bachelor's degree in child and youth care work, but if they've never worked with kids before, they have this exact same process going on. That in your first year, you're almost totally focused on yourself. As you try to talk with a child, you're saying to yourself, am I doing a good job? Did I say the right thing? I hope he doesn't say something that confuses me. Like you're really thinking about yourself all the time. it takes you about a year to literally listen to them in terms of what they need rather than what you need. And that's true whether you are a brand new Bindi worker or whether you come out with a bachelor's degree in childcare until you have that first year's experience. New people, when they write down what happened today, they talk about, I was frightened when, I was happy when, things went good for me when. It's all about them, even though they don't quite say it that obviously. But as you read it, you realize they're talking about their experience, not what the other people's experience is. After about a year, you stop doing that because now you feel comfortable doing the job. And now you have the energy to focus on the other person's experience. So there is aside from whatever training you try to give people, there's a significant difference between the paraprofessional at the first year of their experience and at the second year experience. And supervisors have to be very aware of that as they work with people. So when you're working with that first year, level 1, I call it, paraprofessional, the issues for you as a supervisor is personal safety is the first thing that they need to deal with. Personal safety around, am I going to get through this process without losing my sense of, how nice I am, or how I don't want to be embarrassed, I don't want to be humiliated, I don't want to feel dumb. So they're anxious about their competence. I really don't know how to do this as well as I'd like to be able to do it, particularly when they're working with more skilled workers, because the more skilled workers make it look easy. And they're thinking, I can't do it as well, so I'm anxious about my competence. The next thing, especially in the first few months as a new worker, you're just overwhelmed. There's just too many things to try to learn all at once. And so what happens is you can't really absorb any new information. So supervisors need to know that you have to do a minimal kind of training in the first few months. That people need less information, not more information, which supervisors who aren't skilled try to give you this 200-page manual to read in the first 2 weeks, and you're just wasting your time. People can't absorb that information because their self-focus is very high. When you're finally in your second year, I can supervise you differently because your personal confidence is building, your anxiety is manageable. So now you can focus on learning strategies and skills. I always say that the second year worker is like a good chess player. They don't just worry about what's happening right now. They can say 2 hours from now, I've got to do this. 3 days from now, I've got to be set up to do that. So they're really thinking ahead all the time. That first year paraprofessional can't do that. When you're in level 2, now your external control skills, meaning keeping it safe on a broader level than just what's right in front of you with the kids that are right in front of you or the families, they become more important and you get much better at doing that. Your competence focus is not on whether you can go home today without too many scars on your body, and instead it's now become, am I doing a good job? Am I actually helping these people? And I find that the worker after a year's experience, in other words, in their level 2 process, they really have very positive interactions with people because they're no longer focused on this has to work for me. Now they're focused on this has to work for you. So people are suddenly much happier with how they're receiving the services from that level 2 worker. And this is a time when training is very useful. People are very excited to get training. So that paraprofessional worker at level 1, you need to tone down the training. They still need some training. Supervisors need to, again, individualize what workers are ready for. But at the second year, that paraprofessional level 2 is really when your training is going to be most effective. So what I want to leave you with is you can take a model like an Bindi model and with patience, first of all, in terms of trying to create a good child and youth care agency or program, you can take local people and do it well. You need a supervisor who literally can see the whole spectrum. In other words, they know where they're starting, but they know what the goal is too. Okay, so they're not just trying to develop paraprofessionals and leave it there, because child and youth care work, and that's why, as you talk about certificates, once you get into child and youth care work and you get excited about it, there already are lots of steps that are already developed that people will move into pretty naturally, so that you don't have to say, after the certificate, we don't have anything else to offer you, that kind of piece. So I think that supervising paraprofessional workers, even though it sounds fairly simple, is actually pretty complex, but there's lots of room for people to go from paraprofessional to being a very professional worker. And it's a natural process of experience, supervision, and training. So thank you very much.
I'll go ahead and share with you a bit on the practical side, on the relevance of a national association, and picking up on the Zambian story. Just basically to give you a simple context in which we work, which I believe is more representative of many countries in Africa. Zambia is as a democratic governance system. We are 13 million plus in population, and over 2 million children have been orphaned due to HIV and AIDS by 2010. And our population is at 46.4% of our population was below 15 by 2010. And above 65% of people live under $1 per day. And so I'm talking more about the work of Zambia Association of Child Care Workers, of which I'm the chairperson. The association is aimed at promoting child welfare through quality service provision in Zambia. It was formed in 2005. It began as a small district network whose aim was to have a platform for child and youth care workers to interact. And after some time, we were introduced to NACCW when we traveled to South Africa to see some of their work. They also introduced to us the basic qualification in child care. And through that training and our discussions, we realized the need for the network to form to become an association. Because we noticed that each one of us was doing our own thing in our little corner across the country. And then it dawned on us that good as it is, you might not be able to gather momentum for a national advocacy or change policy at a higher level. And so we formed the Zambia Association of Child Care Workers. To date, out of the 10 provinces in Zambia, we are working in 5 of those provinces. The scope of our work mostly is coordinating and promoting quality standards of care, capacity building for child care providers and leadership, research and advocacy, awareness raising, and networking in the field. Some of the programs that we have been promoting through different organizations are ICBND, that most of you now have heard about and know about. This also began when we trained about 15 of our child and youth care workers in Zambia, and it has also been producing good results, working now in 2 provinces. That's one of the pictures that we have. We have also, through ICBND, been introducing safe parks, which are now in 5 locations in the capital city of Zambia. About 1,500 children plus have attended these parks since 2013. About 105 parents have also been through the parks. And we also had a situation where we brought in PMTC for the pregnant mothers, so that when they come there, they are also tested and educated. And out of those, we noticed that about 20 of them managed to deliver HIV-negative children from the education they receive. Mostly in Zambia, when you come, development in terms of construction is on the rise. So most of the places where we had play parks and open grounds have been taken by housing initiatives. And so you have to look for space to provide a safe place to play. We are also running, as one of our key programs, the basic qualification in childcare, which has now been adopted as a foundational training recognized by government. And now it's part of the minimum standards of care that the government has advanced. We have so far trained close to 2,000 child and youth care workers since we started. And BQCC now has been adopted in principle for accreditation by a technical institution that is in charge of validating all the technical trainings in Zambia. We also have introduced since the beginning of last year leadership trainings. These are targeted at leaders in the field and also in residential institutions that influence our work. We explore ways of providing effective inspirational leadership. And then we have so far held 3 of these trainings focused on visioning, engagement with government policy, advocacy, and resource mobilization. And therefore, our relevance as an association in the country comes in about 4 areas. Firstly, is that through training of child and youth care workers, we have promoted efficiency and quality of care in the country for those who have come through our training. And now every child and youth care worker is asked to complete the BQCC as a minimum qualification because it is now government certified by Teveta, like I said earlier, and we have now heavily consulted also on many decisions in the country on what happens with the life of the children and in this sector. Secondly, we have influenced legislation and policy in the areas of child and youth care worker, learning from our big brother in South Africa. So BQCC has been adopted, as I said, as one of the minimum standards of care, as a booklet that has been launched by government, and every institution must abide by that. It has also been included as part of the child policy. So the principles of care are all there, and child and youth care workers have to sign those principles before they begin to work. One of the other examples that some of our child and youth care workers, in their travel documents, like Felix who is here, on the profession, we have been recognized we can write child and youth care worker as a profession, and the government will endorse that on any document that we have. And so we have also spoken strongly to the child policy, the minimum standards of care, the Juvenile Act, the Fostering and Adoption Act, and the Bill of Rights for the Children in Zambia. Thirdly, the child and youth care work field is increasingly being taken seriously in the country. The leadership trainings have increased awareness, and also the leadership forums have stimulated interest from directors who never thought they needed any kind of training in this area. Sometimes we would gather them together and say, come for the training. First, they will ask you, how many hours is the training? Do I need to be in the training? I already have a degree or a master's degree. But as they come to those trainings, then they begin to realize how ignorant they were in some of the areas. And they have become some of our major advocates at many of the forums. And so with the help also of Adoption Centrum, we managed to introduce a newsletter called The Zambian Child. This has stimulated national debate on different issues. We issue it every quarter, and also we have opened a website where you can find that newsletter. And through representation of members in various fields, the agenda of children is increasingly being addressed in the nation. And as I leave you now, it's important to note from our experience is that everyone realizes it's important to look after children, especially the vulnerable children, both at household level, at government level. But the amazing thing is, it always has to take some convincing. People know it, but they still need to be convinced that they should do it. When you talk about budget, then the blocks will come. You still have to convince them, but they'll tell you it's important. And so we realize because of that, a national association is very important because it gives us a united voice in the nation and a very strong platform to advocate for the needs of children. Thank you.
Very good.
Good afternoon. We're going to just look around the regulations within the South African context. Now, the history of the child and youth care work within the South African context has been that within the child and youth care field, it was organized since 1975, where national standards for the ethical behavior of child and youth care workers were developed, and a shadow non-statutory regulatory body was also developed. It was only after 1994 that the sector then advocated for the establishment of a statutory regulatory body. And only in 1998, the then Social Work Act was amended, and it then became the Social Services Professional Act. This then allowed for the development and regulation of emerging social service profession, and it took some years beyond the legislative change for the actual regulations to be signed off. And most recently, in 2014, the regulations were eventually signed off by the Minister of Social Development, the Honorable Bathabile Dlamini, and these are both at paraprofessional and professional level. Now, the South African Council Social Services profession, it's basically it's an umbrella body where we now have two boards that direct policy on professional specific matters, and this is the Social Work Board and the Child and Youth Care. And within that, the key elements are child and youth care workers, the professional and auxiliary levels, and students at both levels, at professional and at auxiliary level. Now, let's just look at the process to registration. Is that first, the regulations and conditions for registrations were developed, and that was quite a detailed process in developing those. They were then sent out for public comment. Once we received the comments, feedback was integrated. They had then to be sent through council. And eventually, once all those processes had been completed, the minister eventually promulgated on them, and that was in October 2014, which was quite an important milestone in the whole process. So what does this all mean? It means that South African child and youth care workers are required by law to have completed a year-long accredited training course before becoming employed as either an auxiliary or a 4-year professional degree to practice as a professional child and youth care worker. They're also obliged to register with the regulatory body and will be required to provide proof of continuous professional development. They are also required to adhere to a set of ethical standards of practice which protect the rights of the child and family service recipient of child and youth care workers. But in the event that the child and youth care worker does and is found to be behaving unethically, they can be deregistered and prevented from practicing. Now, the South African Child and Youth Care Workers Code of Ethics embraces 6 broad areas of responsibility. And we're talking the responsibility to self, responsibility to the children, young people, their whole families. We're looking at the responsibility to the colleagues within the work environment. We're looking at the responsibility to employer, the professional, and to the broader society. And in this context of the reality that, by the end of the century, almost half of the world's population is going to be coming from this continent, South Africa is now very serious and demonstrating its commitment to both developing and licensing a child-focused children's workforce. So the professional board is that statutory body that makes sure that it champions for the dignity of the profession and promotes its ongoing development. So we'll just end with a celebratory note in the sense that since the promulgation in October 2014, we have about 7,000 child and youth care workers who have already received their registration numbers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the panelists for actually taking us on a journey in child and youth care work. We started off with looking at what is child and youth care work, and then we talked about how is child and youth care work practiced. We looked at the supervision of child and youth care workers, and we looked at the value of a professional association and the role it plays in the development and professionalization of the child and youth care field, and looked at the end, the issue of licensing and regulating child and youth care workers in the South African example. What we've done in the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance is actually looked at the principles for the development of workforce. And we've looked at the competencies that are important for the development of the child and youth care workforce at a para level, particularly in Africa. So we have given you, I think, an experience of what is child and youth care work through this panel. And we are very open now to hearing, both globally and from the House here in South Africa, any questions to the panelists.
Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Brown. I'm with the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance, and we have received a few questions via email and that have been tweeted. So I'll just ask the first one. It says, I appreciate how the various panelists have presented on different aspects of the importance of a career path in child and youth care work, as well as the importance of strong supervision. Having strong supervisors is so important. In terms of the role of a supervisor, could you highlight what you think are the most important elements of supervisor selection and training?
Just one issue that comes up over and over again, and I keep wondering why it isn't obvious, is you can't be a child and youth care supervisor if you're not a child and youth care professional. There's no other profession that would let someone from a different profession clinically supervise the practice of their workers. So the problem that we start with sometimes in some locations is there aren't enough people with good child and youth care professional practice to create a group of supervisors. And I think then you can start with that as a problem and you can deal with that. But you don't deal with it by just parachuting in social workers, psychologists, and educators to supervise child and youth care workers.
I guess one little piece that I want to add to that is that people tend to do what they experience. And so I think, you know, if you want your child care workers to practice relationally, then your supervision has to be a relational form of supervision. You cannot tell people to practice relationally. In other words, I believe that as supervisors, we have to be with staff the way we want the staff to be with the young people, which just builds on Jack's point, because you won't be that way unless you're a child and youth care worker yourself.
Okay, we have a few additional questions. Our next question is, in a country where there is interest in establishing a new cadre of child and youth care workers, what steps would you recommend that they take?
Firstly, I think from the experience of Zambia is that we had to create awareness by having open forums with other people who are working in this field to begin to discuss the need for us to unify our voice and get together. Of course, there are other people who feel threatened, to feel that maybe their job will be taken away, another group is coming, our group will be irrelevant. But we need to assure them that the network becomes a platform for strengthening, for empowering, and for building each other. And then from there, we had to move on to the next step now of looking at the legislations, the constitution, and also discussing with government, is this relevant also in the plans that they had? And so we saw that relevance, and then we had to register, and we had to establish an office. So at first, someone had to second themselves to be a director from another organization, so they'll spare a few hours to help until the office then gets established. But the important thing is to maintain the sense of a network, so that everyone knows that we are part and parcel of this movement.
Thank you very much. There's a question here from South Africa.
Okay. Greetings. My question is just one of the speakers spoke about the deep pain. So I was just trying to understand, after listening to a number of speakers during this event from different countries like Canada and New Zealand, I just want to understand how would you relate the deep pain with the process of colonization? Thank you. I think it was between the first two speakers, they mentioned something around the deep pain. So how would you, because of, I've been reading lately a book by Dr. John Henry Clark from the US, and he's also talking about the intergenerational pain. So how would you relate that? Thank you.
This is a big question, I think, with many different elements, but perhaps one of the biggest developments over the last 10 to 15 years has been this discovery of childhood trauma and the effects of childhood trauma. Too often, I think, in the past, we glossed over the pain that children bring into the work that we do. And we talked about troubled children or acting out children. We had all kinds of they disturbed us, so we called them disturbed, as Thomas pointed out before in his articles. And I think in my own research, what I discovered was in the residential programs I studied, 100% of the children were experiencing deep and profound pain, which was a result of traumas, losses in their life, abuse, neglect, and various other forms of distress, disease. So I think one of the things we have to do is prepare workers to not only respond to this pain, and to see the pain behind the behavior. In other words, we don't, as childcare workers, react to children who express anger or violence by reprimanding them. We actually try and get behind the behavior to the pain that is there. In fact, I had to coin the term pain-based behavior to draw attention to the fact that that's what was happening. It's pain-based behavior. And instead of saying, you don't talk to me like that, I'm a childcare worker, we say, I'm picking up a lot of anger right now, and I'm wondering if you're feeling a lot of pain. And you're trying to get behind the acting out, in quotes, to what is actually happening for the child. That's a very complex issue to deal with. We not only have to understand the sources of trauma and the effects on child development, the effects on brain development, which is quite profound, research is showing, but also to deal with that secondary trauma that often the workers experience. Working in an environment full of pain is a very challenging thing to do. And so I think that speaks to the supervision that we were hearing about from Jack, that in the first year, we have to help workers come to terms with what's happening for them in order for them to be able to respond sensitively to the pain that the children are experiencing. And I'll just tell you one quick story. In my own research, this one child, I said, how are you experiencing this program? And they said, they're very good to me. They care for me very well. I'm quite happy here, but they're not helping me with my stuff. And I knew right away what he was talking. I didn't have to know what the particular stuff was, but he sensed himself that the emotional distress that was within him was not being addressed. And so I think in my research, the good programs actually understand the trauma, and the staff are well prepared to engage children in such a way that they can stop being victims of fate and become shapers of their own destiny. That's really at the heart of what we're doing. I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe that's a piece.
Thank you. And maybe from South Africa, if you could just mention your name and where you're from quickly before you ask your question.
Thank you very much. I am Reverend Elijah Kuluti from Katoras Isibindi, Project Coordinator. My interest is in the situation whereby a person is already qualified in other discipline at the degree level and want to convert to do degree in childcare worker profession. Will there be possibility of accreditation of some of the subjects he has covered? And secondly, can such a person actually study distant rather than being full-time at school?
Thank you for the question. I thought we heard yesterday in our presentation from the Dean from the Durban University of Technology that the Minister of Higher Education has been talking about articulation. And he's been talking about how does every training that you do link to an opportunity for you to study further and to lift your level up to the other. She also spoke about the fact that the degree is going online and that the master's degree that is being offered and is being prepared at the Durban University of Technology is a degree that is a research degree. So we would be able to find out a little bit more about what would the possibilities be for you with them, as well as what is the future for development in the field.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Stadi Mukalakala, South Africa, and from Bloemfontein, Wingi Direko Secure Care Center. I just wanted to find out from our brother from Zambia, how committed is the government of Zambia in terms of respecting and making sure that they sign international statutes and treaties and make sure that these are respected in the country, taking into account, you know, the history of most of African countries when it comes to issues of children. Thank you.
I think from the experience and interactions we have had with the government of Zambia is that they are very much committed. We have signed and domesticated most of the legislations concerning children in the country. And that is why they are now part of our policies, they are part of our laws in Zambia, and that is why we are able to practice. So the commitment is there. The challenge, of course, remains to us who are practitioners in the field to keep the voice alive and the work going.
Can I just add to that and just make the point that if you're developing a profession that is not very well known in your country and you're wanting to be sure that it is seen and it develops appropriately, it is very important to actually connect with government and to work in partnership with government. I think the point about including your profession in government's policies and legislation is critical for entrenching the development of a profession, especially a new profession.
Good afternoon to the world and to the people here. Alfred Harris from South Africa. History in the making, we're making the world smaller. My question is around the whole issue of supervision, and we know that currently we don't have the number of experienced child and youth care workers trained in order to provide relational supervision to staff, and as Tom Garfield said, that the relationship that the staff has with the children is what must happen between the staff and the staff. So we need to overcome that. That's a one question. How do we then move to make sure that we have enough experienced people in order to provide good relational supervision? Secondly, the nanny tag that's been attached to child and youth care work. How do we make sure that people can, as a profession, articulate their work in a way that makes it understandable and different to other social service professionals? Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Those are questions that we struggle with. When I teach my students, I say, when you give your report, if everyone else who was listening thinks I could have done that, then you're not doing a very good job. When you give your report on a child and the rest of the psychologists, educators, medical people turn and say, wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. That must take a lot of training and thought to think about what you're doing that way. So that's the first thing, is that people who are supervising child care workers have to look at the way they are reporting on children and say, if this kid's mother could have written that report, then it's not that helpful. Okay, we unfortunately do just the opposite. Supervisors not only encourage, but create these fill-in-the-blank forms that, you know, you could write about almost anyone. And it doesn't really distinguish us as doing anything significant with that child. The second question about how do you create a good group of supervisors, first of all, you have to have patience. You can't just tell supervisors to do a better job. The second thing is you have to convince people to run agencies, and you described it this morning in your own workshop. When your boss says, we're no longer just going to warehouse kids, we're going to actually help them, as Jim Anglin said, deal with their pain, then you're going to start looking for and creating job descriptions that say, this is the kind of person, these are the kind of skills someone who wants to be a supervisor in my agency needs to have. And that will happen, okay? I just laugh. When Jim's pain-based behavior, most agencies with non-child and youth care people running it think you deal with kids' pain by having anger management workshops rather than anger expression workshops.
May I add something? Yeah, I have a phrase, and I was really thrilled that the DUT students used it in their workshop. And that phrase is, child and youth care is not rocket science. It's far more complex than that. And I think I've been in this field. I have a 40-year badge here that we got at the conference. It's actually 44 years, but they didn't have a 44-year badge. And I can tell you, the more the time has gone on, the more complex I understand this field to be. And we need to find good ways to communicate. So to reduce that field to 6 points was not easy to do. And of course, it doesn't cover everything by any means, but it gives some points on the compass to help guide people in understanding what we do. And I think it's been said several times, we need to get better and better at articulating the complexity of what we do and how we respond to that in a way that, frankly, other professions are not trained to do and don't know how to do. And but we don't do ourselves a service if we aren't able to articulate what we do. So, you know, more strength to those DUT students in the audience. You are learning how to express the complexity and to convey that in a way that prepares the system to respond to the complexity of the children in a very sensitive and therapeutic way.
At the risk of putting my foot in my mouth, which I tend to do sometimes, we're all constantly evolving as human beings. You know, I'm different at 68 than I was when I was 18. You know, I think differently, I see the world differently, I conceptualize differently, but more importantly, I experience differently. And I think as we talk about helping people move towards working more relationally with young people, I think we need to think about things like Jack talks about, the length of time a person's been in the field, but then also contextualize that in terms of human development, you know, and the stages of development of people. And contextualize that again in terms of the context of their previous experience. Even though I may be 68, if I spent the last 40 years working in a behavioral controlling program, shifting from that is going to be very difficult. Some of my greatest struggles in helping people learn to work relationally have been with people who have been ensconced in a particular way of doing things that grew out of the behavioral models. And they've been doing it for 10 years or 20 years. And now suddenly someone comes along and says, by the way, this way we've been working all these years, that just wasn't right, you know? And so now here I am as a human being in need of my own safety, you know, to feel good about myself. And as a human being, then I defend against this demand for change because it's the way I've been doing it for 25 years. And if you're telling me the way I did it was wrong, then I've been being wrong for 25 years, and I don't want to hear that message. So this transition, which so many people go through, is a terribly difficult, at times, transition. And so as supervisors, I think we also need to think of ourselves as the facilitators of growth and change in the same way that we think of ourselves as in our work with children as facilitators of growth and change. And the changing of a culture within a program. My experience, and I've done it many times, but my experience is that that's a good 5-year voyage. That's not a 1-year voyage, that's a good 5-year voyage. And so I come back to Jack's comment about what does a good supervisor need? Well, for those first year people, she needs a lot of patience. And if you're going to change a program, I would say hang in there, this is a journey.
Thank you very much. We're going to get a question now from our international group that are listening in.
Yes. Both of these are directed to Ms. Magida. The first is a general comment. That the individual would like to compliment you and the entire board on your hard work to ensuring that all child and youth care workers are recognized as professionals.
Thank you.
And the second is a question directed to you. What do you think are the main benefits for registration, both for the workers and for the families?
Oh, the benefits are numerous. I mean, first of all, it's about the recognition. You're now being recognized as a professionalized worker, not just someone that's just providing a service. You also can be held accountable. The accountability is quite important because the sector itself has been calling out for quite a long time that they want to be professionalized, but more importantly, they want to be held accountable. But in them being held accountable, a key element is also around the code of ethics that they have to be practicing in relation to. And so that code of ethics, and we'd also, as we'd mentioned, the whole responsibility to the actual employer, to themselves, and also understanding the whole context that they're operating within. So, yeah, so the benefits are numerous. Yeah, and the fact that we keep tabs with them to know that they're still out there by them continuously registering on a daily basis. And hopefully with all of that, we're able to look at some of the training opportunities to support the sector at the same time.
I think if I could just add to that, I think the professional regulation of child and youth care workers lifts the status of the profession of child and youth care workers. In multidisciplinary teams, they have a more powerful voice to advocate for children. In being recognized as child and youth care workers, ultimately, we shift the focus to the child, and we ensure that we recognize that children in our country require people who are trained, who are growing, who are supervised, and who are able to practice in a way that is always in the best interest of our children.
Hi, I'm Sabita Samji. I'm a child and youth care worker, and I have been in this workforce for 35 years. It is such a delight to see that child and youth care force is now crossing our borders in the continent. We were known as the Dark Continent, and I do hope that the world can see the light is shining now in our continent, Africa. I'd really like to thank our colleague from Zambia for sharing such good news about the development in your country and the part that your government is playing in ensuring the welfare of children. Our children are our children wherever they are, whichever part of the world. And I'd like to quote this from The Little Tree, The Education of Little Tree. Grandma said, when you came upon something good, first, share it with whoever you can. Find that way. In that way, you'll find that the good spreads to wherever, no telling where it will go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. It's been a very popular quotation in South Africa, that particular one. Grandma said, when you come on something good, don't keep it to yourself, share it. That's the way the good spreads, no telling where it will go. And Zambia is a wonderful example of where it has gone. And we've just had a meeting earlier on with FITSE Africa, and we know that we've actually validated our competencies from the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance in Kenya. And we know that child and youth care workers will be in Kenya, developing and growing in the same way as South Africa and as Zambia. Thank you very much for that comment, Sabita. We have a comment here from South Africa again.
Thank you very much. My name is Tiri Maga, one of the senior managers from the Department of Social Development. I'm interested in referral systems. We are all working with the child, different professionals. So I just want to hear from our visitors, how is their system in relation to referring? We have different mandates to care and protect the child. So if you can share with us how you do it.
Well, if I could jump in, I think what the child and youth care worker brings is that experience in the life space of the child in a unique way. So I think of a particular situation that one of my students was involved in, quite experienced when she came to our program, and she was part of a multidisciplinary team. And after about 2 months, I bumped into the psychiatrist who was a member of this team. So there was a social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist, child and youth care worker. And the psychiatrist said to me, I just want to tell you that I've learned more from your student than I've learned from any other professional about the children that we work with. And he said, and I said, what was it? And he said, she brings the view of the child in the other 23 hours. He didn't say it quite that way. But that I see the child in an interview perhaps once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. But this worker could say, however, you need to understand these other things about the child, which I have seen, and seen in his relationships with his peers, with his family, etc. So the richness of that observational and relational experience is what we bring to the table. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add to this, and it may or may not be relevant, but I hope it is. Many of us would know the name Fritz Riddell, who was very much a grandfather in the field of child and youth care. And one day, Fritz was talking in Philadelphia, I think, and he said, it's wonderful for us as psychiatrists and psychologists that you child and youth care workers keep coming to us and asking us for our advice and, asking us about what we should do. He said, it's wonderful because it's really good for our egos, because the truth is we really don't know any more about what to do than you do, and if anything, you know more than we do because you spend all your time with them. But thank you very much, he said. It makes us feel really, really good.
I want to spend a minute on this because it's true. There often is friction between people on a treatment team, different professions. And here's been my experience. Child care workers, because they haven't been really clear about the fact that they work relationally and developmentally, often are expected by the education system to make their students behave well in class so the teacher can do a better job. The justice system wants them to work with their kids to get them off the street, to keep them from committing crimes, to behave well and in court and on probation. The social work system wants them to stop acting like they're abused and neglected, and so that they don't have to be reported anymore. And what happens is that as the child care worker takes on the other person's professional expectations, in other words, make my job more functioning well, they lose who they are, and so they get frustrated and a bit contentious with all the other professions. Where if they were clearer about, I'm working relationally and developmentally so this kid becomes more self-responsible, more aware of their effect on others, then everybody else's job would be easier, but they would be doing the child care job, not doing anybody else's job.
I just want to make one more comment. It has to do with how we work together with other professionals and how we can actually make that work. I think Jack's point about all these expectations that are placed on us that aren't necessarily about how we work is a good one, because, the reality is we all want to belong. Like, we all need to belong. And so when I go to work in a team as a child care worker, if my identity isn't strong and I'm not connected belonging in professional ways with my other colleagues or my other childcare workers, I will want to belong to this team. And perhaps part of the price of belonging to this team is that I have to give up my identity if I'm not connected someplace else, like to my association or to my network or to my groups. And so I say, you know, if we're going to work with strength, then we have to be connected to our profession. Number two, I say, if we want other people to accept us for who we are, then our job is to be with them the way that we are with everybody else, i.e. the young people. So that if I be with you relationally in a context of a team, then gradually relational practice will enter into the team. But if, as you know, Jack suggests, if I end up following everybody else's directive, then we will never be ourselves.
My name is Jando Maidza from Limpopo. My question is specific to Dr. Tom. Since many child and youth care workers are watching, they must be asking themselves, how do I do this therapeutic daily life events? Are there any specific books you can recommend or sessions to get more information about this daily use of daily life events?
Oops, sorry, I noticed we have 2 minutes. And, you know, it takes me that long to say hello, usually. But let me only suggest this. The greatest resource in the world for childcare workers is the International Child and Youth Care Network, cyc-net.org. If you've never been there, it's filled with literature and stories and discussions about relational practice and working with young people. And I just wanted to be that brief because I know we only got 2 minutes.
Great. I'm not too sure why our slide is not actually giving us the links so that we actually know who to contact to find out more about child and youth care work. It's our last slide. I think that we have had, though, a rich conversation together. We've had a wealth of information shared from the panelists here today, and we have heard from their wisdom of childcare that seems to be capturing, in a way, hundreds of years of child and youth care experience across this table. I just want to use this opportunity now as we round off to say thank you to them for coming, for sharing, and for using this platform of the NACCW Biannual Conference, our 20th Biannual Conference, our 40 years of birthday celebrations, to share to the world globally the work that we are doing in child and youth care work globally. It is a great pleasure for me to also acknowledge and thank those many people who have connected in to join this webcast today and to join us in this panel, and for all the questions that have come from you as well globally. We know that you are in different time zones, and some of you are early in the morning, some of you are late at night, and you're sitting up connecting with us. It's something that we truly do appreciate. And to the South Africans and the representatives from other countries that are here today, I think the 85 other countries that are here, 85 international people here with us from 14 different countries. Can I say thank you very much for being part of this webcast? This is the first global webcast that South Africa has had at a conference, and we appreciate the opportunity and the partnership with the Global Social Service Workforce Alliance to actually have had the opportunity to share this time together. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering if we could have a song, please.